Okay, so welcome everyone to another Moonee Valley Library's online author talk. Moonee Valley City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge their spirits, ancestors and elders past and present. My name's Jenny. Tonight we're in conversation with Lyn Yeowart, who's the author of The Silent Listener. And you can, if you haven't read the book already, you can get copies from the library. We'll be talking for about 30 minutes, and then we'll be having time to have questions. So if you've got any questions, store them up, and we will put them in the Q&A section, and we will then ask those questions of Lyn a little bit later in the session. Lyn is a professional writer and editor, and she has more than 25 years of experience writing and editing everything from captions for artworks to speeches for executives. It's a very, very broad list. Her debut novel is The Silent Listener. I have my copy here. Highly recommend it. It's loosely based on her events from her childhood growing up in rural Victoria, and she is now happily ensconced in Melbourne, where there is very little mud, she tells me, although recently I think there may be a little bit more. And she has lots of books, as you can see in the background of her screen there. So welcome, Lyn.
Thank you, Jenny. This is honestly, I'm just so delighted to be here.
I'm so glad. I am really pleased to invite you tonight because, as I've mentioned more than once, The Silent Listener was genuinely one of my favourite reads for this year, if not my favourite so far. I really loved it. I couldn't put it down. One of the few books I actually read from cover to cover without cheating and skipping to the last few pages or last few chapters, as I'm known to do, which would have spoilt it completely. So congratulations on that. For a first novel, I thought it was absolutely wonderful. For any novel, I thought it was wonderful. And talking about it being your first published novel, was it a story that you always wanted to write, or is it something that came to you more recently?
Excellent question. And I'm going to say yes and no, or yes to both of those parts of the question. So initially it was always a story that I wanted to write. And I was really, I'm going to say, a bit obsessed with writing a story about what it was like to live on that farm and in that family, which is very close to my actual family, some changes, but very close to my actual family. The farm is pretty much exactly the farm that I grew up on, with all of those elements we were talking before, right down to things like the water lilies, the dam, the rubbish tank, the wall hanging on the kitchen wall. All of that is pretty much exactly as I experienced it as a child and how it was. And I was pretty driven to write certain elements of that story. But along the way, I realised I didn't want to write a memoir or an autobiographical piece. And slowly it morphed into fiction. And then there was a point at which I absolutely knew it was going to be fiction. And so a whole lot of things that are fiction, so I'm going to say things like Wendy Boscombe and Shepherd and Vicky, for example, probably the biggest fictions, and also Ruth. I didn't have a sister. So and once I kind of got into writing fiction, I found that it really liberated me and I could develop a much stronger plot and hopefully pull readers in a little bit more. And so, yeah, I had always wanted to write this novel, but it morphed into something that I hadn't realised I was going to write.
Okay, that's really interesting. And as I was writing the questions for this particular talk, and I'm also reminded of a few weeks ago, Gina Wilkinson spoke to us too as well. And one of the quotes that I came across is, "Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth," and that's by Albert Camus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I can't help but think of that when I read your book and a few others that I've read. I'm not saying that, I will never know how much of this truth is truth and how much it isn't, but for me as a reader, there was so much that was true to my life and true to the experiences I had of growing up in small towns and communities and secrets and things like that. So well done. I think you did an amazing job. The novel is full of twists and turns. What came first, the plot or the characters? Because the characters are so strong. I suppose this is a little bit what we talked about before, but was it the plot or was it the characters?
Definitely the characters. And in fact, when I started writing, I was just writing little vignettes of my experiences, and the characters were, I was going to say fully formed. They weren't really quite fully formed, but I was drawing on people I knew and had known very well. And so the characters were sort of sitting there waiting for me to write and develop as well.
Mm.
But then, as I said, once I realised and that I could make this fiction, and then also I want to say when I realised how much fun it was to write fiction, coming up with the twists and the turns became kind of the one thing that I really wanted to do, and I really wanted to inject a lot of that into the book. I think partly because, there are some grim elements to the book. It's not all, it's not all storybook farm life. It's not like that at all. And I was really conscious that it was quite grim and there were, a lot of dark elements to it. So having those twists and turns, I thought would also hopefully make it a more compelling read and maybe even attract a wider audience, because I did feel like I had a bit of a message underneath everything. So I like the idea of appealing to a much wider audience. And look, as I said, writing those twists and turns was just a lot of fun. It was also a lot of work because every time you think, maybe this character could do that, or maybe in the past they actually did this, when you decide to do that, then there's a lot of work to go back and make that happen. So, for example, I think I just said before, Wendy Boscombe, the little girl who goes missing, she wasn't in my real life. And she arrived because one day Joy was cleaning out the shed in anticipation of her father dying, and she looked at the chest, and we did have this chest under the sort of workbench in my dad's shed, and Joy looks at it and thinks it's big enough to hold a body, and then she thinks, maybe that's where Wendy Boscombe is. And I wrote this and I thought, hang on, who's Wendy Boscombe? And then I thought, if Joy thinks she's in the chest in the shed, then she must have disappeared at some point. So then I had to decide, okay, when did she disappear? And then I thought, I know, all of these other things can happen based on the fact that this 9-year-old girl has gone missing. But it took me, then I had to go back and make absolute massive changes to incorporate Wendy's story into it.
Because it is quite a complex story, and the twists and the turns, I could imagine keeping track of that and having to go back and, make sure that Wendy's storyline fitted in to each aspect as the story goes along. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And her role is actually quite pivotal in lots of ways to the story.
Yeah, it is, and yet she doesn't have many words.
No, she doesn't, but she's there, isn't she, in the background? I'm very conscious that I don't want to give too much away about this story as I'm talking to you. I know the novel is fiction, and as I said, the characters felt very real, and I think you've actually I think you've actually answered this question, but I want to reword it a little bit. How much did the characters change as you worked through the different drafts? Like, was Ruth always the way Ruth was? Was Joy always Joy, or did she change from your initial draft of how she appeared? Um,
12-year-old Joy was pretty much always the way that she was. So that was the starting point. And at one point I was not even going to write about older Joy. But relatively early on in the process, so I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago, I thought, oh, I know, I should have her coming back and telling the community the truth, because it was still hidden. So that was basically all she was going to do. But when she came back, as I was writing those chapters about her coming back, I wanted her to be both, in many respects, still a bit scared of her father, but I also wanted her to have matured. She couldn't be the 12-year-old Joy just in an older body. She had to be, emotionally, psychologically more mature, but still flawed, of course. And so then at some point I thought, what if she sets out to wreak revenge? And so that meant also I did go back and make some changes to her younger self to kind of have that element that she was the kind of person who would take revenge. Changed in that respect. Ruth never existed in early drafts either, and then one day she sort of popped up, but again a long time ago, 10 years ago. And I really liked her being there, because I'd never had a sister, so that meant I had to think about what Joy would be thinking and how she would be interacting with a sister. And then I brought Ruth back to the house at the same time as Joy comes back to the house to look after their dying father. So I had to, think carefully about how that was all going to happen as well. And I don't think Ruth changes. Ruth is pretty much the same person throughout.
I would think that Ruth was quite consistent, wasn't she? Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you then.
No, that's good. No, I did actually. I was pretty definite about Ruth not changing. And those of you who've read the story will know why that's important.
Yeah. I think one of the strengths of Joy's character was her young self, and even the way she thought. And there's I do have an example of that, which I thought was absolutely quite amazing, but I probably shouldn't read it here in case it gives too much of the story away, although it probably won't. Let me see if I can find it. This is towards the end of the book, but it's an example of Joy and how she thinks, because I look back to myself when I was that age, and it's like you're writing for me. And she's describing Wendy and how Wendy's got a doll and has milkshakes, and Joy never has any of those things. And she says she doesn't know what it's like to have anything bad happen to her. She's so spoilt with her dolls and her chocolate milkshakes and beach holidays. And that jealousy of young Joy felt so real, and so how a young girl would be feeling at that time. And I thought you did that really well. So on that too.
That's an interesting and important scene. And I really wanted to nail something about Joy that would mean that, in some ways lots of things fell into place. And I don't know, I spoke to a few people about whether they had that sort of feeling about being really intensely jealous of someone. And, I think a lot of people have, as children definitely, and And then I think even as adults, I think we often still have that, twinge of jealousy, not necessarily in a malicious way, but, oh gosh, yeah, that person seems to, because of course, the older you get, the more you realise nobody has it all.
Yeah.
And nobody has a completely charmed life, of course. But sometimes from the outside, looking at other people's lives, you think, gee, they have this or they don't have that, and how, what would that be like? And a few people I spoke to, admitted, yeah, I have those thoughts, and that young, they can actually kind of ignite almost a malicious jealousy.
Yes, yeah, and you're right too about it going on into adulthood. Sometimes we have those thoughts too as well, or certainly on my part, I have.
Just don't act on them.
No, I'm not acting on any of the.
I'm hoping you don't act on them.
No, I'm not going to. Everyone in the book has strengths and weaknesses, and some of their actions are understandable but not always excusable. And I was thinking as I wrote this question, there were so many people who knew what was happening and yet chose to ignore it. In fact, a lot of the book is about that. Small town secrets, and I don't think it's actually just small towns. I think it's secrets in general, and the secrets that communities keep that have incredible consequences for families and individuals and lives. And it isn't always excusable. Were you aiming to shine a light on those dark secrets that people keep that have such damaging effects on people's lives? Did you actively go out to do that?
I really, really did, because this is what happened in my family, where there were secrets and there were terrible things going on in our house. And I know now that people knew about it but never did anything about it, including people in my father's church and neighbours and also family.
Yes.
And I think I'm being honest when I say I don't hold anything against any of those people. Because when I was a child, I didn't really realise that they knew or suspected what was going on. And B, because, for example, an aunt of mine who told me after my father died that she knew what was going on, I didn't feel any anger or disappointment or anything, because she was a really lovely person, and I think they just didn't know what to do. And didn't, there's that thing about not wanting to get involved, and the idea that what goes on behind closed doors is nobody else's business, and that parents have the right to bring up their children the way they see fit. And I think that people didn't have the words or the concepts of things like coercive control and even the idea that physical punishment and domestic violence was a bad thing. And so, my oldest brother, he got the strap at school.
Yes, that happened in my school too as well. And I should take this time, and I should have said it at the start of our talk. If anyone is affected by anything on tonight's talk, we will have links at the end of the chat, and you can go to places like Beyond Blue and Lifeline, and the library can also give you some other information if you need it to. My apologies for not sharing that with everyone sooner. I do apologise for that. I'm well aware that some of the story can be quite dark, but it needs to be told, and I think I thank you for that, and I hope that everyone that's listening, if you need any help or anything has triggered you, please seek out some of the resources I mentioned and reach out to the library, and we can provide you with some more information. It was, yeah, for me too, it was quite a confronting book too as well, because of secrets in my family too, and they can be quite damaging. And I'm sorry if I've upset you by asking you that question, so I do apologise.
Oh, no, that's right. No, that's fine. I've talked about it a few times now, and actually it's been very interesting at writers' festivals and other events where people have come up to me, strangers have come up to me and told me that they've also had similar childhoods, and even people who I count as friends who I had no idea that they experienced similar things. So I've had people sitting across cafe tables telling me that they had similar challenges, difficulties in their childhood. So I think it is something that's perhaps not spoken about as much as it could, be. And I know also one person commented that they knew that sort of thing went on in the 60s and the 70s, but didn't think that it happened anymore. And I kind of think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's the type of violence is a little bit different, but we don't have to go very far.
No, yeah.
We only have to go back a week to find a woman in Australia who's been killed by her intimate partner. So, I think however it plays out differently to what happened in the 60s and 70s, there is still a lot going on behind closed doors that needs to basically stop.
And perhaps books like this that can bring it up and bring it to the forefront while telling other stories to make it perhaps less confronting for some people.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm going to also say that one of the things I wanted to do, perhaps there's a little bit of maliciousness in this, I don't know. I actually wanted people who haven't lived through that to experience a little bit of it. I think when we read non-fiction, and it's really important that we do, and books like Jess Hill's important, and articles and personal stories that people like Grace Tame and so many others are being brave enough to come out and talk about and bring to the fore of our mind. I think that fiction has a slightly different role to play, and I hope it's just as valid and just as important. And I'm hoping that, perhaps by being immersed in a book like this and reading about it through a young girl's point of view, does actually help people understand what that might have been like and why it's so important for us to make this stop. And also, I think it hopefully will help people perhaps be slightly kinder when they judge other people. So maybe someone's very quiet, or maybe they are crippled by self-doubt, or maybe they seem to be the opposite and they seem to be very domineering or very bossy or very outspoken or judgmental of others. But I think there's something that's happened in their life to make them like that, and I don't think we should just say, well, everyone should be this or that because that's a good way of being, because of course none of us can just be something. We're the product of our pasts, and so I'd like to think that sometimes people might just stop and think a little bit more kindly of someone if they're not, I don't know, what you think they could be.
Look, I don't want to dwell on this aspect of the novel too much because there's so much else I want to ask, but I agree with what you're saying, and I think you've raised issues that really need to be addressed. And as I said for myself, I really connected to the characters in the book, and it was quite, yeah. Anyway, I won't dwell on that. One of the strengths of the books was that it did tell the story through several generations. So we see Joy grow up, and we see the effect the abuse has had on her, but we also see the effect the abuse had on her mother prior as well. And how much research did you have to do? I'm skipping ahead of myself because those characters changed as they grew older, and their situation meant that they had to change, but they also changed because of the environment that they were living in and the time frame they were living in. So how much research did you have to do into those different time frames? And I'm thinking especially of a time frame that for many of us who might be listening to tonight is quite recent history. Well, it seems recent to history to me, that being 1983 and the events that happened there. And you have to be very careful sometimes with recent history because people remember it. Recent history, I say that, and it's 40 years ago, but gosh. But you have to be careful with history because it can be interpreted by different people in different ways. And how much research did you have to do to find out about the different decades that that each character lived in, or particularly the mum and the dad and young Joy and young Mark too as well, who's the brother of Joy for those that haven't read the book yet, and then the characters that are introduced a little bit later in the book in the 1980s.
The era that I had to do the most research for was the 1940s because I wasn't alive.
Neither was I. Thank God. Well, yeah, no.
So I did have to get a few details woven into the story. So I didn't try and overdo things like the war, but I did make mention of rations and ration coupons. And I think actually Jane Sullivan, who's a literary columnist for The Age and also in one of the writing groups that I'm in one of the workshops we were in, she mentioned once that you really only have to insert one detail to create that impression of a particular era or a room or something, maybe how someone dresses or something like that. And that really stuck with me. So I thought, I'm not going to try and over-describe what a room looked like at a particular time or anything like that. I'll just insert these hopefully strong, relatively small details, but not too many of them. So in the scene where George and Gwen meet, I know I've got the girls, the group of young women, Gwen's one of them, and they're adjusting their gloves and hats and coats. And I know I don't even describe what the hats and coats and gloves look like or anything like that, but and I'm going to say some of my research for that sort of thing was just having seen movies.
That seems fair to me.
But when it came to talking about the war, I had to get some of my facts right. So I'll say I did a lot of Googling, but I read a lot of things from the Australian War Memorial. They have some great just articles and little bits and pieces that I could use. And then I have 3 friends who are historians, and they're all both actually World War I buffs, but also World War II. So I spoke to all 3 of them, particularly around issues relating to conscription and where people went when they were conscripted and what sort of length of time people were conscripted and for what sort of fighting and things like that. And one of them read an early draft of one chapter, and I had something about the dead soldiers coming back from the war and Pam Cupper if you're listening, Pam. Pam said, no, that didn't happen. They didn't come home. They were buried. That's why we've got so many cemeteries and so on in Turkey and France and so on. So that was terrific to have people who knew those things and could correct my mistakes. So that was definitely the year I did the most research for. The 60s was fairly easy, even though Joy, if she was alive, would be older than me by about 10 years. I found that sort of fairly easy. I guess, when Joy was 12, I would have been 2, 2, 3, 4. And so I have fairly strong memories of, what the farm was like. And I don't think the community changed that much from sort of the early 60s to the early 70s, to be honest.
It was you did the timeframes really well. I thought that was a strength of the book, and I must admit I did mention that I didn't see 1983 coming, and I don't know how I missed that. I really didn't. One of the other things in the book that struck me, you've mentioned the flowers before, and a big part of the book is Joy picking flowers and her mother picking the flowers. Sorry, I use my hands all the time and you can't see me. If I was standing up, I'd be waving. So a big part of the book is, picking the flowers and having those beautiful flowers in this quite, for me, I imagine quite a grim surround, and having the beauty of the flowers, but as an outsider, not realising the work that's involved in them, in picking them and, sort of transporting them and putting them together into wreaths and floral arrangements and all of that. And a big part of the flowers is the water lilies that are on the dam. And the dam, for me, I felt was always there, and it was like a dark, threatening presence. Like Joy was always talking about having to go down to the dam with her hoe and fetch those water lilies, and the danger of the snakes and the eels in the dam and the eels in her stomach and all of that. And the dam seemed to follow her around wherever she went, right up to the end of the book. Did you plan the dam as being almost like a character in itself, or did that just happen? Or has no one ever thought of it as a character except me, who's might be quite silly?
No, I like the idea of it being a character. I think you're right, Jenny, but like a lot of things in this book, it just kind of evolved into being into having that importance that it had. And it wasn't until it wasn't until about 18 months before the book came out that the dam took on the significance that it has.
Okay.
And so, as I said before, I had to go back and weave it in a little bit more so that it was much more of a constant presence in the novel.
A bit like Wendy, you had to go back and change it a little bit to make it all fit in. That's really interesting, because I felt the dam whenever I was reading it. I could feel the dam was there.
That's really good.
Thank you so much, because we've talked for about 40 minutes, which has been amazing, or perhaps I talk too much, I don't know. But that has been really interesting and quite fascinating. If anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and I will put them to Lyn. I did notice that a few things came up in the chat, but I can't see them now. So if anyone put anything in the chat, please put it back up in the Q&A. The first question I've got is from Jano, and she's saying that one of the things she loved most, and hang on, where's it gone? Some reason I can't see the whole thing. Oh, that's right, I've moved it now. And that was always also such a beautiful balance to what was grim, in your words, she's saying, was Joy's childhood synesthesia, if I pronounced that correctly, and the dictionary she made. I forgot about that dictionary, and it has a big part in the book. Can you talk about how that aspect came about?
Yeah, I have to say, thanks, Jane. I have to say that's a part of the book that I really love too, and it popped into my head one day. Oh, I think I can say this, when I was in Mexico writing, which was an amazing experience. And my daughter has synesthesia. She has what I call the common garden variety of it, which is that she experiences colours when she hears words, numbers and letters. Every number and letter has its unique colour that she just experiences simultaneously in her head. And I've long been fascinated by synesthesia, even before Prue was born, my daughter, and before I knew she had it. And so at some point, because I wanted Joy to really love words, I had in the novel this idea that she loved words and that she loved reading. And then, one day this idea popped into my head that she would have this form of synesthesia where words, instead of having colours associated with them, or instead of experiencing colours simultaneously, she would experience images simultaneously. And I thought, I wonder if this actually exists. And anyway, it does. So that's good. It's a very rare form of synesthesia.
Okay. I've got a comment from Rachel who says, thanks, Lyn. I love your novel. Which part did you find the most fun and enjoyable to write?
The twists and turns. I really enjoyed that. And I also really enjoyed writing Shepherd and Vicky. And they haven't been part of the original plan either. And I felt that because they were completely and utterly fictional and almost kind of, I wanted them to be in sharp contrast to Joy's life. So I'd like to think I kind of had a bit of fun with Shepherd, and particularly Vicky. I really enjoyed writing her. And also Miss Boyle, who has a minor role, but she's also slightly larger than life. So I really enjoyed writing those characters too.
Okay. And please put some more questions up if you've got any for Lyn. Can we purchase the novel from the library or a supplier? I know you can get copies from the library. We certainly do have copies that you can order. I got my copy from Collins Bookstore in Puckle Street. And where else can you purchase copies, Lyn?
Well, pretty much anywhere, as they say, any good bookstore. Any of the independent bookstores, and then the chain stores like Dimmick's and QBD and Collins, of course, and then there are department stores that have it, and there's an online version available and an audio version available. And I'm just going to do a little boast here, because Penguin wrote to me the other day, and my publisher, and said that the audio and the ebook versions of The Silent Listener are in their top 10 sellers.
Oh, that's wonderful. So who has done the audio book? Is it
Penguin did that?
Penguin did that, yeah. Okay.
Same day that the print copy came out, and the audio.
Did you read it, or did somebody else, an actor, read it for you?
3 different people read it. So someone read from Joy's perspective, young Joy and old Joy. Someone read from Gwen's perspective, so the 1940s eras, and someone read the chapters that are written from Shepherd's perspective.
Okay. What character did you enjoy writing the least?
Ooh, what a great question. No one's asked me that. Boy. I guess I'm going to say George.
Yeah, I wondered that.
Yeah, because that was pretty challenging in a few different ways. One, because he's kind of pretty much my father, so that was challenging. And 2, because there's not a lot to redeem him. So I felt that when I was writing scenes where George was, I guess I had to be a bit careful, just in terms of maybe not making it too grim or confronting, but I recognise that there's some parts of it are, but also just to, make him realistic. And sometimes I feel he might be a bit a bit too black and white. Maybe there aren't enough nuances around his character, but then I think also we always see George from Joy's perspective.
Yes, very much so. And there were no
or we see him from
features,
where he was so loved, but also because he did so many great things. So maybe it's a realistic portrayal. But thinking about it, I think he was the hardest to write. That's a great question, and as I said, no one's asked me that before. So
good to have questions that no one's asked before. Someone has asked if we can get signed copies. Is that possible of your book?
Yes. Well, it's a little bit difficult with COVID, of course.
Yes, yeah.
But for those of you who live in the Moonee Valley Libraries area, when we are allowed to travel, I will go over to Collins Bookshop and I'll sign copies there. So I'll put that up on my social media.
Okay, so for everyone that would like a signed copy, there you go. That's good. What can we look forward to reading from you in the future?
So luckily, I was really lucky. I signed a 2-book deal with Penguin. So I've started working on my next novel, and I'm taking the same tack about I'm writing fiction, but I'm writing about a social issue, and the one I've chosen is based on something that happened to a friend of mine. She had a child when she was 15 years old, and she was sent to a home for unmarried mothers. And some of the things that she's told me about that time, that experience, absolutely unbelievable. And it's not in the same sort of grim, horrible physical and emotional punishment and so on. It's a very different angle. I would never have guessed this in a million years. And so I'm doing some research about that as well, and creating this fictional story of a couple of families whose lives.
That's really interesting. I can't wait till that comes out. Someone has noted that there's going to be book group questions, and I'm trying to get through these a little bit quicker now because I'm conscious we're running out of time. I've heard there's going to be book group discussions in the next reprint. Did you write the questions or?
Oh, I did, and they're actually they're available at the moment on Penguin's website.
Oh, there you go, everyone. If you want some book club discussion questions, check out Penguin's website.
On that note, I might just say that also that Penguin are bringing out a new edition. So we've had 2 reprints so far, which has been great. So thank you very much to everyone who's bought it. And now they're bringing out a new edition next year, so it'll be a different size and the cover.
Yeah.
So
that's great. I've got an interesting question here. How important was the role of religion in the book and Joy's growing up? And was there a hint in the book that George had been abused himself growing up?
Okay. I don't remember. There is a very small hint because I think Shepherd and Vicky.
Yes, they're having a discussion towards the end, yes.
And Shepherd says, who knows what George must have gone through to make him the man that he was. So, very good pick up. That's excellent. And the religion thing, sorry, what was the question exactly, please, Jenny?
How important was the role of religion in the book and Joy's growing up?
It was very important because, again, that was how my father was. So the wall hanging in the kitchen in Joy's in the novel was hanging in the kitchen that I grew up in, and it has a religious kind of, I don't know, we'd call it meme these things, religious sort of verse on it, and I think it was important for me as a child, and then also in terms of writing the novel, that George's religious fanaticism helped to develop that sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde element of him. So on the outside, he was a much loved, respected elder and long-standing elder of the church. And, of course, the Christian church promotes that we love everybody and that we turn the other cheek, and there's a whole lot of messages around looking after people and caring for people and loving people and so on. So George subscribed to all of that, but of course in the home behaved very, very differently.
Can you remind us what that quote was? Because I do remember I can see in my eye the piece of,
Great.
but
So
I can't quote it.
it goes like this: Christ is the head of this house, the unseen guest at every meal, the silent listener to every conversation. And when I was growing up, that was just creepy. It was horrible. You never ever, it was the original Big Brother. Never ever had a moment where someone wasn't watching you and listening to you. It was just awful.
And Joy describes that quite well in the book. I'm talking about Joy as if she's a completely different person that you've had no sort of input into, but she is a character in her own self. Lena has commented that this was awesome. Thank you, Lyn. People are asking when your next title is going to be up, but I know you're still writing it, so that's going to be a while off yet, I should imagine. There'll be a few drafts. Yeah. Has anyone else got any questions? We've got a few minutes left, so if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to put them to Lyn. I will let everyone know, I'm just waiting, that we will be, there will be a little, not quiz, but there'll be a little pop-up section where you can say what you thought of tonight's event. So please respond to that, because that helps us to decide or plan for our future author talks. So please respond to it, the little questionnaire at the end. Thank you so much, Lyn. I found this absolutely amazing. It really was genuinely one of the best books I've read, and certainly the best book I've read this year. I couldn't put it down. I love the characters, except for George, who I found very, very confronting, but it felt very real to me. I've got another question that's popped up. What have you found is the hardest part of the writing process?
Whoa. For me, it was believing that I could do it. I really did suffer from a lot of self-doubt. So a big shout out to people who belong to various writing groups that I belong to and who have supported me so incredibly, and also to the Lovely Ladies Book Club.
Yes.
An early draft and gave me very positive, encouraging feedback, and then a year later did the same thing, really very generous of their time and their insightful comments. That was just absolute gold. So, yeah, for me, I think it was, getting over that mountain of self-doubt. And also I know when you're writing, and I know this is true for other writers as well, and it was definitely true for me, not knowing whether it was going to be published or not, that you put thousands of hours into something and not, maybe no one would like it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to keep going and keep coming back to it and thinking, yes, I'll keep going, I'll keep going, I'll keep going, I'll keep going. But, yeah, lots of positive feedback from people helped me do that. So,
and the Lovely Ladies, we were lucky enough earlier this year to talk with the Lovely Ladies on our podcast. So if anyone is watching tonight and would like to hear the Lovely Ladies and how they were involved in the process of helping Lyn develop through her drafts and work through the writing process, you can find the recording on our website. So please listen out to that. They were wonderful, and it was really interesting hearing them talk about the whole process. I know my colleague Jackie, who was helping me with that particular podcast, was very jealous of them because she wants an in to all the authors that she reads.
That'd be great. Oh, goodness, imagine reading early drafts of some of the amazing masterpieces out there.
It would be incredible, wouldn't it? Yes, yeah. And having that, just that, one of the things that the Lovely Ladies spoke about was being able to, ask you a question about why you did this or why you did that. And Jackie just thought that was her idea of heaven, being able to ask.
And it was my idea of heaven too, because that made me think, well, why have I done that?
Mm.
What do I need to change to make, I don't know, characters' motivation more obvious or more subtle, perhaps, or having that detailed questioning and feedback in those early stages from real readers was just, as I said, absolute gold, and something I really recommend other writers do as well.
And it was certainly fascinating for Jackie and I as being being people involved heavily in reading and writing. Well, not writing, but reading, and helping people find those perfect books. Hearing how the process developed was just amazing. I've got another little comment here saying thanks for this discussion, and they really enjoyed the book. It was cleverly written, and they liked all the imagery and analogies. I can't speak now. I'm getting tongue-tied. Of Jekyll and Hyde and the two-sided puzzle. Well done. Look, thank you so much, Lyn. It's been a really interesting night. I've really enjoyed it. I'm probably a bit of a fangirl tonight. Thank you for everyone coming along. And as I said, please respond to the little pop-up questionnaire that comes up, and hope to see everyone again at some of our future author talks that are coming up. Don't forget to check our website. And thanks again, Lyn. Thank you so much.
Jenny, I've just absolutely enjoyed every second of it, and sorry it can't be in person, but maybe another time. But thank you for inviting me and just going along with everything so easily, and for all the lovely comments that you've given me about the silent listener. That just has made my day.
Thank you for coming along. It's been my pleasure, quite genuinely, as you can probably tell. I want to read a draft of that next book. Kelvin, have you popped the little quiz up? I'm not sure if Kelvin's. Oh yes, he's popping the quiz up. So we'll just do the quiz, or it's not a quiz. It's just a little participant question, and we'll get the answers if we can, because it really does help us plan for the future and work out what works and what doesn't work. It's been an interesting couple of years going to the online way of doing things, but I'm glad that we've still been able to continue with the author talks, because it's been something that we've built up quite well over the last few years, and it would have been a shame to lose them in these times.
Yeah, I think it really highlights the great work that libraries do in keeping readers connected with books and libraries and librarians and authors, and and it's so important that we do this, and it's so important, we know, particularly while we're all still going through lockdown and maybe self-isolation and so on, to just remember and revel in the joy that reading can provide all of us.
Yes, yeah. And one of the things, because I was flicking back through the book again today, of course, and towards the end, in fact, the last line is is Joy talking about her and Ruth and Mark in the Infinite Library, and she's saying she's where she needs to be now. And yeah, the Infinite Library is something that stuck with me. So right, last line talking about libraries, and yes, has great meaning to the book.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like the idea of the Infinite Library. I mean, that's, for me, that's bliss. But then I don't have enough time to read every book that I want to read anyway. So
I don't either. Yeah,
library, because there will always be more books that I want to read. So
there'll be always something new coming out.
Yes, but also I know there are so many books that have come out before, I don't know, just this year. So many that I want to read.
Yes, yeah, me too. And sometimes I find I have times when I can't read as well, for whatever reasons too. Thank you again. I think we're just about finished for the night. I think, the polls ended. So thank you everyone for coming. As I said, we hope to see you in person sometime soon, probably next year sometime. And perhaps then we can get you back at some stage to talk about your next book.
Yes.
And yeah, if you need someone to read the draft, keep me in mind. And Jackie, of course, Jackie. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming along. Thank you. Bye everyone.
Bye.